Ambassador Andrew Young is 83 years young, and because of that, he has the privilege, the right, and we want him to have a chair. Chris, if you would set that out here for him to speak from so that he would not have to stand. Just about a week or so ago, he was in a car accident where a cement truck running a red light caused an impact on his car, and thank God he walked away with just a small bruise on his shin. I'm going to, as a way of introduction to Ambassador Young, read part of a proclamation from the mayor of Cincinnati, and then I will make a personal comment about Andrew Young, and then he will speak. I'm not going to read all these whereases, Ambassador Young. You've heard them a million times before, but the first two I will read. Whereas Ambassador Andrew Young has always valued his life through the lenses of his first career, that of an ordained minister, and whereas Andrew Young worked for civil and human rights, his many years in public office as a U.S. Congressman, United Nations Ambassador, and Mayor of Atlanta, his leadership of the Atlanta Olympics Committee, his advocacy of investment in Africa through Good Works International, and the establishment of the Andrew Young Foundation, on all of the responses to his call to service, and on and on and on and on and on. And then it says, now, therefore, I, John Cranley, Mayor of the City of Cincinnati, do hereby proclaim May the 20th, 2015 as Andrew Young Day in Cincinnati. So we are here on Andrew Young's Day. Just a personal comment. When I was first appointed as U.S. Ambassador to the African Union, I had a conversation with Ambassador Young at ITC, where I was president at the time, and I said to him, well, how do you manage all the stuff you do? And he said, look, you go and serve as an ambassador, and remember that everybody you come in contact with is a member of your congregation. And that was an exceptional piece of advice. All over the world, I saw everybody I worked with as a member of my congregation, thanks to you. Now, last year, President Obama hosted an historic summit, the first time any U.S. president had ever brought together the collective African heads of state. And in all of the meetings that were being planned with the Commerce Department, Defense Department, and everybody else, they kept saying, well, you know, all cabinet members are going to be hosting dinners all around Washington, D.C., and we want heads of state to show up. I said, that's a problem. There's a dinner being hosted in honor of Andrew Young the same night. Presidents are not coming to your dinners until they go to say hi to Andrew Young. And people kept telling me, no, it's not going to happen that way. Secretary this and secretary that's hosting the dinner. These presidents are going to come to their dinners. I said, no, they're not. They're going to go to see Andrew Young first. And lo and behold, all of those dinners around Washington hosted by cabinet members, and every single one of them was delayed because every president from the African continent came first to say hi to Andrew Young. And as it should have been, and then former President Clinton came to say hi to Andrew Young. And so the next day I told all those folk in Washington, y'all could have saved yourself some embarrassment had you just delayed your dinners because everybody was going to say hi to Andrew Young first. No further ado, it's an honor to welcome you here again to the Freedom Center.
Thanks very much. Let me try to stir things up real quick. This is probably one of the most confusing times There was no air conditioning then, and so every time I walked past, I saw these people in brown shirts Highland Hitler. And I was 4 years old when I made my daddy stop and try to explain that to me. And he did it very positively. He said, you know, white supremacy is a sickness. And you don't get angry with sick people. If you get angry with sick people, you end up catching their sickness, and it can be contagious. You have to think your way through how you help people get over their sickness. And then he took me to the Movietone News to see Jesse Owens in the 1936 Olympics. And when Jesse Owens won the first race, Hitler got up and stormed out rather than give him the medal. But my father said, but see, Jesse didn't get upset. He just went on and won 3 more gold medals. And he said, without opening his mouth, he made it clear that the white supremacy that Hitler was talking about was not really factual. And he always said, whenever you get in a struggle, and life is a struggle, don't get mad, get smart. And your mind is the most important weapon you have. And when you get emotional, it stops the blood from coming to your head. And you start thinking about running or fighting. And he taught me how to run and how to fight. And Jesse Owens was always my hero. But he said, never stop trying to get a new way of approaching old problems. He said, if the ways that most people approach problems were working, we wouldn't have had those problems. If we're having problems, it's because we haven't found proper ways to approach them. Now, let me say something. I've been having this argument with my grandchildren. They're grown now, and a couple in college. One's got a master's degree in public policy, working for a congressman. And all my children have always known more than me. And now my grandchildren know more than me. But nothing is more, exciting to a grandfather than to say something that gets his grandchildren upset. And lets them know that maybe they don't know everything in the world. And at my birthday party the other night, my granddaughter got up to introduce me, and she was talking about race and Ferguson and the same old ritual. And when I got up, I said, baby, we got to talk about that. There are 1,000 people here. And I said, this isn't the place for it, but you're wrong. What do you mean I'm wrong? And I said, it's not black and white. It's not black and blue. It's all green. So, and she says, you're crazy. We need to talk. Well, but let's go back to the Nazis. And the Jewish community doesn't see it this way, but Nazism came about as much because of inflation and the breakdown of the German economy as it did any white supremacy doctrine. The Germans took their frustrations out on the Jews because the Jews were successful. Why were the Jews successful? Because they had been prohibited from buying land in Europe. Jews could not own land. And because they could not own land, They collected their wealth in diamonds, in gold, and other fungible assets that were portable. They were people who had been run all over the earth, and the reason they're so tied to Israel now is they've never had a land that they could call their own. And I say, this is it. The U.S. is the promised land, for all of us. But it was the economic success of Jews in the midst of inflation and economic chaos. I mean, that's where banking came from. The Rothschild brothers, when the Germans wanted to go to war with the Romans, the Roman Church, after the printing press. I mean, we always say that it was Martin Luther's 95 Theses on the front of the church that stirred up the division between the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church. Now, you all know that that's a lot of crap. Nobody gave a damn about those theses. See? It was really the power of the Roman Empire versus the emerging princes of the states of Germany. And we had a 100-year war. See, now, we say it's a religion, but that is not true. It was economic. It was a struggle for power in Europe. And then when they printed the Bible in English, the King James Version, 1611, I don't know why the Church of England's translation wasn't good enough, but it wasn't good enough for Congregationalists, and it wasn't good enough for Methodists. It wasn't good enough, nothing was good enough for Baptists. We ended up leaving there and coming to the United States. See? Now, realistically, you think that was about doctrine? See, that was about new emerging economic forces that were created by this new technology, which was only the printing press. And we didn't get around to settling it, all of that difficulty, until we started thinking about it economically. Now, if you Google John Maynard Keynes in your iPad or something, and I had heard about that, and I didn't know, had never read any, and I just typed Keynes in. What came up was a treatise called The Economic Consequences of Peace. And when I read it, I said, I thought Keynes was dead. I thought he'd been dead a long time. And he had. And it wasn't until I got to the very end that I realized that this was written in 1913. And it was written trying to prevent the Second World War. And it was talking about how the economic imbalances and inflation and unemployment would create tensions that would cause another war. Well, nobody listened to him, so we had the First World War. But Roosevelt, Eisenhower, George Marshall listened to him after the Second World War. And Ralph Bunche was in there too. And the answer, the reason we did not have a war after the Second World War was we rebuilt our enemies' economies. And we formed the World Bank. We formed the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations. There are all kinds of, there's a whole network of global institutions that pulled together the world in 1944, which had been disrupted since 1490. Now, we should have learned from that. And we did. because when we had problems with Vietnam and Korea, which we shouldn't have had, Koreans were Presbyterians. I mean, really, all the old Koreans they had been a Presbyterian liberation movement formed by Christian missionaries, like Mandela. Mandela and Bishop Tutu were out of a missionary movement. They went to missionary schools, just like me and Martin Luther King and most of you. And so the church has been in the midst of this all the time, everywhere. But secularists don't want to see, they want to exercise their prejudices rather than try to. I mean, it's easier to hate somebody than it is to try to understand a messed up situation. It's much easier to blame it on somebody. And we do it all the time. But that is very unchristian. So that Bishop Tutu's book is probably the thing we ought to hang on to right now. There's no future without forgiveness. And basically, we were able to reconcile in the South because there was forgiveness. Now, it wasn't that Martin Luther King and Billy Graham agreed. They were constantly pitted against each other. But I was with them in Amsterdam, at the European Baptist Convention, and it was really wonderful to see them thank each other for each one doing his role. Billy Graham said to Martin, "I'm very proud of your prophetic ministry. I could not do that." And Martin said, "And if you were not pastoring the White South the way you are, we could not do what we're doing." But we don't ever look at it that way. See, we want to be divisive. We want to be difficult. We want to set ourselves apart and above our adversaries. And my understanding of the church and almost all religions is that all men sin and fall short of the glory of God, and women do too. And so we really need to figure out how to work these problems out together. Now, the success of the civil rights movement was we did that. We had a no-fault analysis of segregation. Martin used to say, look, we can't blame white people for segregation. A man can't ride your back unless you bend over and let him. When you straighten up your back, he falls down on his feet, and then you can stand toe-to-toe as brothers. Well, that's what happened in Birmingham. You know about the dogs. Nobody gave a damn about the dogs. I don't think the dogs even bit anybody. See, we got wet. Nobody got hurt, to my knowledge, but Fred Shuttlesworth. And that's because he stood up in front of the fire hoses, and these fire hoses with all of this heavy pounding his body rolled him down the street. And he got bruised and battered, but didn't break anything. I was there, but I got behind a tree. I wasn't trying to play hero. And I knew you don't run from dogs. You look a dog in the eye and you back off slowly, but you don't run from a dog and you don't stand up in front of a fire hose when you get out. But that notwithstanding, what really called us together was that before we started any demonstrations, Martin sent me he said, "Do you know any of these white folks in Birmingham?" I said, "Well, I went to a National Council of Churches." We used to have the National Council of Churches used to have its Christian education meetings here in Cincinnati during the 60s. And they'd come from all over the country, and we'd meet here in Cincinnati. And I had met a lady from the Episcopal Church in Alabama, And I remembered, looked up in the pamphlet what her name was, called and said, can you arrange a meeting with Dr. King and the bishop, with Reverend Abernathy? She said, no, I can't, because I don't know Dr. King. She said, I know you. I can arrange a meeting with you and the bishop, and then you arrange it with Dr. King and the bishop. So before any demonstration started, in the diocesan house in Birmingham, we sat around the table and we talked about race. We talked about the fact that we realized, we weren't accusing anybody, we realized that we were financing our own discrimination. And we said, we're going to have to stop that. And it'll be uncomfortable, but we're just not going to pay any more to be segregated. You have to decide how much that sign, white water and colored water, how much does that contribute to your business? That helps you make money, and if that makes more money than the money we're going to spend, okay, keep it. But we're not going to spend money where everywhere we go, we're discriminated against. And it took about 90 days, but for 90 days, 300,000 black people and many white people did not buy anything but food or medicine. The economy shut down, and then 100 businessmen got in a room and agreed that they could take down those signs. They said, we said, why haven't you hired any women or men as clerks? And they said, we can't find anybody qualified. I said, not true. I said, you bring these beautiful little girls in from Auburn and Alabama, and they stay 6 weeks and then they run off with their boyfriends. The people who really run in your store are the maids. Go home and ask your wife, if she wants something in a department store, who does she go to? She goes to the maid, because the maid knows what's happening. Just let the maids put on those fancy dresses they're selling and give them a commission and treat them like the important assets to your corporation that they are. And in a matter of about an hour, after they cussed us out for an hour, the next hour, we realized that all of this foolishness was costing them money, and all they had to do was get their money back, was to get rid of the foolishness. They took down the signs, and if you didn't want to drink water, don't drink water. But the signs weren't there. The women started working. People started eating at lunch counters. And nobody stopped eating at lunch counters. But I'm saying that we dealt with the economics of segregation, and that's why we solved the problems of Birmingham. When I left after Dr. King's death, he was killed fighting for garbage workers. So when we came back to Atlanta, there was a garbage worker strike, and so we had to get with the garbage workers. And so we were all arm locked, sitting down in front of the garbage trucks, trying to keep the garbage trucks from coming out, and they sent for the police. And then that was 69, Atlanta still had 90% black police. White police. And so they pulled out their weapons, their billy clubs, and they started toward us. And I was sitting in the middle. I said, hold up, gentlemen, please. Can I have a word? And they were shocked. I said, I just want to remind you that these men are city workers who are on strike asking for a 2-step increase so that they can give their families shoes and clothing and education. I said, now your families need the same thing. And you're city workers too. Now if you beat us up and we lose, you think you're going to get a raise? But I guarantee you, if we get a raise, you're going to get a raise. And so just don't ever forget Do your job, but don't forget we're on the same side. See? So the guy reached my hand out to shake my hand, and he picked me up and put me in jail, but that was all right. But that was all right. He understood. You know, they let us out of jail, and it took us another couple of hours to settle a strike that had been going on for several weeks. But I'm saying that we settled it when we got to the economics. And it wasn't race relations, it wasn't class, it wasn't morality. It was the economic consequences of our actions. Now, I'm not an economic determinist by any means, but anybody that doesn't realize that man and women are economic animals, amongst also moral, also enlightened and educational, also cultural, but economics is the foundation on which this society has been built. And because the economics, as long as the economics is free and fair and open, the society works. When one group begins to take more than their share or try to exploit another group, it begins to break down and you have trouble. Now, that's sort of what's happened in female trafficking, but it's also what's happened in culturally through the years. We have never had economies that were inclusive of women. I remember we had a famine in Ethiopia when I was mayor, and we decided we were going to have a march, and the Ethiopian community in Atlanta raised over $100,000 in a weekend. And we decided who was going to get it, and in the process, I got into an argument with one of our young women on the of Ethiopian descent on my staff. And I talked about, genital mutilation as sick. And she jumped all over me. You cannot criticize our culture that way. That's our culture. I said, wait a minute, hold up. Now, I know I'm your boss, but I'm not trying to claim any special privilege, but it's just, I don't give a damn if it is your culture. You shouldn't be cutting off little girls' clitoris and sewing up their vaginas. That is ignorant. It spreads disease. It keeps women subservient. It's humiliating. It's the reason why every tea plantation in Kenya, the women pick the tea. They all have a rope across their head that indents, their skulls are indented across there because they tie these baskets around and put them on their head, and they go through the fields picking tea, and all their lives they're carrying hundreds of pounds of tea leaves. And it puts a furrow in their forehead. And I said, why don't you complain? I said, that's your culture too. See, slavery was our culture, but it was bad. We are much better off. A city like Atlanta that decided, it was probably Coca-Cola, and that decided it could not be a global company. In the midst, if we did what Little Rock did, or Birmingham, it was bad for business. And so we got together, black and white, and said, we're going to have a business. The mayor bought airport for $90,000 land. And he gave Delta all the land they wanted for $1 a year for 50 years if they moved to Atlanta. And he put up red lights on Peachtree Street. And they voted him out of office. Well, the business community said, wait a minute. We don't have enough progressive white people in this town to move this town forward. So they went out to Atlanta University with Dr. Mays and Dr. Brawley and Vivian Henderson and all of the black intellectual leadership, Baycoat, I mean, all prominent names. W.E.B. Du Bois had been out there, and you know, the Urban League's leadership had come through there. And they said, look, we need to form a progressive coalition of black intellectuals and what was then white business. Well, what it ended up is that the businesses realized that they were better off being integrated. So the businesses are far more integrated in Atlanta, and same sort of thing was happening here. Trying to remember who your predecessor was that sat on the Delta board. Ed Arts, yeah. I mean, the same sort of thing was going on in progressive companies all over America, where they were grounded in the cities, and it was going well. What happened, though, was the economy went global. And whereas every CEO in Atlanta, when I went there and ran for Congress, was born and raised in Atlanta. Now, all the business has gone global. We don't have a single CEO who was born and raised in Georgia. And so that's happening all over the world. That's not race relations. That's globalization of the economy. And it's probably caused as much by cell phones as it is by ignorant police. I mean, there's nothing new. Kids say, did things worse now than they were? I said, come on. You know about the 4 little girls that were killed in Birmingham because that got on television. Nobody told you that they castrated a black teenager the same afternoon. Nobody even knows his name. It didn't get in the papers. I said, they beat police up. I said, I got beat up in St. Augustine they deputized the Klan to beat me up. I said, but in Washington, my son got beat up by 5 black policemen. You know, on a Sunday afternoon, 1 block off Howard's campus. I said, that's not race. That's economics. It's high school educated black policemen who are given a stick and a gun and a badge and maybe 6 weeks training. I'm talking about the black ones now. I'm not talking about, I'm keeping race out of it for a while. And they resent the fact that all these kids, the girls like all the college boys, and even though they got uniforms and they're good looking, and they don't get any play. So, I mean, what is that? Is that race? It's class, yes. But it's part, it gives you a symbol of the fact that it's oversimplification just to talk about race and sex. And one more, well, maybe I'll just go to sex and leave race alone. You know enough about that. I went to, after the Olympics, Nike was under a whole lot of fire for sweatshops and things, and one of the cabinet members of the Carter administration came to me and asked me would I visit China and Asia and study their plants and tell them what they're doing wrong. Well, what I found was not what everybody said. The Chinese or the Vietnamese or the Indonesian women didn't see these as sweatshops. Their only complaint was that they didn't get enough overtime, because these were the jobs that kept them from being sold by their parents into prostitution, or sold to their parents to some old man that they did not like. And the Nike network kept them from being turned into a commodity by their parents. Now that sounds sick, but it's true in Atlanta right now. We spent a lot of time in a YMCA, and we're able to get the boys. The boys are always in trouble with the police and everything else. We can straighten them up, and we can give them a GED, and we can get them in a college. We have trouble getting the girls into the system. Last year we sent about 40, 45 boys. I mean, 40 boys and 5 girls. We had several other very smart girls that qualified, that had spent time in college, but they came back home because their parents brought them back home to put them back out on the streets, because they were making more money on the street. And the economics of prostitution is not just by alien forces in our lives. It's a last resort for people who are trying to struggle in an economy that does not serve them. And so one of the things we're working on in our foundation is how we can create jobs. Now, just a final word, I think our whole problem is jobs and nutrition. I mean, you can talk about anything else you want, but there are 6-7 billion people in the world. And Jim Clifton of Gallup polls, they poll every 150 countries every month. Everywhere in the world, the top issue is jobs. There are 1.2 billion jobs trying to serve 6 to 7 billion people. That's not enough. What is ISIS about? ISIS isn't about religion. ISIS is that Halliburton got greedy. They made $6 billion a month for 9 years. And yeah, they got rid of Saddam Hussein, but they left everybody else unemployed with guns. And they came back to Texas. And when the Congress asked them to account for what they'd done with the money, they packed up and moved to Dubai and said they were no longer an American corporation. Now they're trying to say that President Obama hasn't done enough to stop ISIS. And, I mean, they really want him to start another war so another Halliburton can get rich and go somewhere else with the money. That didn't happen after the Second World War. After the Second World War, the reason we're called the greatest generation is we were weak. We didn't know we could win, but we knew we had to pull together. And so Franklin Roosevelt said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And we pulled the country together, and we were determined that there would not be another war. And so we educated and got jobs for our enemies. In fact, there was a time when I became mayor, when the German economy was doing so much better than the U.S. economy, that I went to Germany and started bringing German companies into Atlanta, telling them that their future was really with us and not. The German population was declining, America was growing, and so we started flying Lufthansa into Atlanta, and we now have over 1,500 German companies. and they hire everybody. But we dealt with the economics of our situation. We also realized we couldn't have a police force that was uneducated folk, black or white. We had to have a well-trained, so in the 8 years I was mayor, we increased police salaries by 75%. But we also made them go back to Georgia State and work on their masters in criminology. We also made sure that 30% of our police force was women, because women, by and large, are much more oriented toward crime prevention and community relations. And so by dealing with the problems of the world and including the economic analysis, you're much better off than if you try to deal with it just as a moral problem. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a moral problem, but Mandela had 3 books in jail with him, I understand. Martin Luther King's Stride Toward Freedom, Gandhi's My Experiments with Truth, and another book that I'd never read until last year. And it was Leo Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You. And Tolstoy's radical view, I mean, he says there can't be any Christianity with violence, that violence and Christianity are incompatible, and that each human being is a child of God, and we are invested in the success of every human being. And I learned that down in Thomasville in 1956 when the Klan was coming after me, and my wife, who was a country girl and a very good shot, but she'd been to one of these Church of the Brethren schools up here in Indiana, and I had been to seminary where we were studying Reinhold Niebuhr and negotiations from a position of strength. So I said, we were starting a voter registration drive. So I said, baby, look, if they come here, I'm going down to talk to them, but I want you to sit in the window with the rifle, and I want you to point the rifle at whoever it is I'm talking to. And she said, I can't do that. I said, why? She said, I can't point a gun at a child of God. I said, that's the Ku Klux Klan. She said, if you ever forget that under that sheet is the heart of a child of God, you need to quit preaching and go find something else to do. So,
let us give him another round of applause. We thank you for your wisdom, because it is true that good-hearted people did not end American slavery. Economic circumstances ended American slavery. And good-hearted people alone will not end worldwide slavery. A change in economic realities will make worldwide slavery unprofitable, which will then bring it to an end.